Hello and welcome to the program. On April 1st, the Ukrainian World Congress International Election Observation Mission released its preliminary observations, confirming that the presidential election in Ukraine met international standards for the conduct of democratic election. Although observers noted isolated irregularities, the shortcomings did not impact the election results. To discuss this, we're joined in the studio today by Eugene, Czolij, head of the Ukrainian World Congress International Observation Mission to Ukraine's 2019 elections. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Alexander.
So the first question is the Central Election Commission of Ukraine has confirmed a voter turnout surpassing 60%. In your opinion, is it a progress? Is it a big number compared to other elections? How do you say that?
Yeah, I think that the fact that 60% of the people have voted under the current circumstances make this a very good number. And as I've said to many so far, that the fact that Ukraine was able to conduct this type of election while it is still the victim of a violent Russian hybrid aggression in eastern Ukraine, illegal occupation of Crimea, is simply amazing.
Now, my understanding is that the UWC has different observers, different kind of observers, like short-term observers for the election and long-term observers. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, thank you. We had long-term observers. We had actually 122 long-term observers that were conducting distance monitoring of media in order to pick up whether there was any interference, foreign interference during the electoral process, campaign, and voting. We were concerned with the fact that, in view of the fact that the Russian Federation has been clearly interfering in other countries in the electoral process, that in a country where they are blatantly violating Ukraine's territorial integrity, that they would also be trying to discredit Ukraine as a whole, while Ukraine was focused internally, it being essentially an election year with presidential and parliamentary elections in the same year, and trying to discredit the electoral process. So we had our long-term observers monitor Twitter, Russian media outlets, and the main media in the country of their residence. And they were doing that since the beginning of March, and will be continuing this process until the end of the presidential elections.
So did they notice any interference? Did they notice a big or a stronger interference in these elections from, Russian side?
We've noticed various articles that were trying to discredit the elections as a whole and the whole process. So, for instance, there were articles stating that all leading candidates were neo-Nazis, or stating
usual narrative.
Usual false narrative. You had statements like that Gallup indicates that Ukrainians not dislike but hate all candidates. There was criticism to the effect that Ukraine did not allow Ukrainian citizens in the Russian Federation to vote, whereas, as you know, they were not able to vote in the Russian Federation because of security issues, but were entitled to vote in Finland, Kazakhstan, and Georgia. So this type of narrative, and a general narrative to the effect that the elections would not be democratic and would not comply with international standards. So that, yes, we have picked that up, and we have also picked up that in countries where they cannot get a message that is clearly disinforming, that they actually pay for advertisement, and we've picked that up in Canberra Times in Australia, for instance, where the Russian ambassador has paid for an article trying to establish that Crimea is historically a Russian city.
Now, would you say that these maneuvers, these media maneuvers, really had an impact on this election, or at least on the turnout? And would you say that it was efficient enough?
It is difficult to measure at this stage the impact. I think that what we are doing at this stage is picking up the various articles, analyzing them, and we will be sitting down with professional analysts in order to do a complete assessment of how much we picked up and what kind of an impact they could have had on the election when we issue our final report.
Now, do these results will help for further election, let's say, in other countries where, well, who were in the post-Soviet or Russian influence, and that Russia doesn't want to see going out. Can these preliminary results be used in that matter, or these results can be used in that matter? How can maybe the West and this country can learn from this election?
You're talking about the results of yesterday's. Yes. Well, I think that first of all, my assessment and the assessment of the Ukrainian World Congress is that there was one big winner on March 31 in Ukraine, and it's democracy. I think that clearly we have seen both a campaign and then election day being perfectly normal as a whole. You had some minor irregularities that you pick up in just about any election in any country, but as I've when I had the opportunity to discuss with the ambassadors of the G7, I said that pretty much any ambassador of a G7 country would be more than happy with an election campaign and an election day similar to what transpired here in Ukraine. I got assessments from observers. We had the Ukrainian World Congress had 219 registered short-term observers that were observing the elections in Ukraine, and together with our member organization, the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, actually 297 short-term observers, and we were the only mission that was observing the process in 25 countries outside of Ukraine. So the reports that we have been getting were very positive results. I personally, in order to have also a feel for the situation, visited about 25 polling stations, and between the voting in those schools and what I would see in elections in Canada, it's pretty much very similar in various aspects. So I think that clearly this country is showing that it's way on track towards establishing democracy very firmly, and I think that other countries will see the benefits and the satisfaction that people get out of a process like we lived through on Sunday.
So in a way, make Ukraine an example of how a country can basically establish democracy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now that's for the positive outcome. What about, I wouldn't say the negative, but what about the challenge still awaiting Ukraine's democratic election process? What can be done to make it even better?
I think that, first of all, I'm an optimist by nature, so first of all, you tend to build on the positive. So I think that people have seen the advantages of a process that was transparent, that was calm, that was proper, without any real challenges to the whole process, as being something that to look up for. So I think that people will become more and more demanding of this type of process, and candidates will see that is not to their advantage to do otherwise. And I think that we'll see now whether the results will be challenged in courts. We will see whether we can get in a normal fashion to the second tour, and then whether the second tour could have the same type of results in terms of process as we had during the first one.
But you're mostly optimistic about the fact that the second tour might have the same kind of process here.
I think that obviously in the second one, it's very clear that the stakes are high. Both candidates realize that, and the challenges are there. And I think that those that want to disrupt the election will probably also understand that this is the time with that the results really count, and at the end of the day, the challenges obviously are there. During the prior to the elections, I visited Ukraine twice to meet with the various authorities that are responsible to ensure security in Ukraine. They all assured me that they were on a high level of readiness, and that they would be able to withstand any challenges, whether on the streets or cyber attacks or otherwise. And I think that they have demonstrated that in a very good fashion. I think that it's also nice to know that when I was sitting with various experts on Saturday and discussing the whole process, that on Saturday, the day before the elections in Ukraine, nobody would venture to predict who's going to win this election.
Which is a good sign.
Which is a superbly good sign, because, as you know, in the Russian Federation, one knows who is going to be the next president more than 6 months before the elections.
Now, and to conclude this interview, this is not the only important election for Ukraine this year. There's also going to be the parliamentary elections following the presidential election. Do the UWC also plan to monitor this election? How will it work? Because I wouldn't say it's more local, but the stakes are different here.
Well, the Ukrainian World Congress has been monitoring every presidential and parliamentary election in Ukraine since 1999. So yes, we intend to be back first for the second tour of the presidential elections, and then in October for the parliamentary elections, which is a superb challenge for the Congress. It's essentially three elections in 1 year. We're not funded by any government or any structure. It is our member organizations that fund the Congress. We had a lot of election observers that came at their own cost. I can think of one lady, elderly lady, that came from Australia at her own cost to monitor the elections, and saying to me that she will come back for the second tour. I think that one of our challenges will be the fact that the second tour is on April 21, which is Easter, and then to get people to leave their families and come for the elections is going to be a bit of a challenge, but we have seen that during the Orange Revolution, where our observers came during Christmas. So I'm hopeful that we'll have a nice turnout of observers for the elections on April 21, and then obviously our regular good number for the parliamentary elections in October.
Well, thank you for this highlight. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today to talk about monitoring elections, and we're waiting for the first round and maybe to see you in the studio to talk more about it. That was Eugene, head of the Ukrainian World Congress International Observation Mission to Ukraine's 2019 elections. Thank you for watching Head to Head. Stay tuned for more.